Everyone. So today I'm going to introduce you to the next recreative task you're going to do. So we're going to do this a little bit backwards. I'm going to introduce you to the task, then we're going to go back to the beginning of chapter 7 and we're going to do a little bit of more analysis so that you can see how this might feed into the way that you'll be writing in this creative task. So it might be a little bit all over the place, but hopefully it will help you come to do this recreative task on chapter 7. So the task says this. It says in chapter 7, reread from What Kind of Row Are You Trying to Cause in My House Anyhow to Gatsby walked over and stood beside her. This describes the argument between Tom and Gatsby over Daisy. Rewrite this scene as though it occurs in Gatsby's mansion. Your recreation should be around 300 words long, and you should think about how the scenery reflects the atmosphere, how each character's interaction with the setting reflect their state of mind. And then you should write a commentary explaining your linguistic and literary choices and how these have reshaped the meaning of the text. Now this is a very different piece of recreative from any that you've done before, and it's a good one to have a go at because it is kind of unusual. In that it's asking you to focus on one specific technique really, and that is to look at the idea of setting and setting a scene. And I think this really is the next thing that you need to be thinking about to add that layer of symbolism into your writing in the way that perhaps Fitzgerald does. So we're going to have a look at some of the ways that Fitzgerald does that. So bear in mind that although what we are about to the focus for your piece of writing is just this section here, where it's only 2 pages of the argument between the characters. We are going to look at the rest of the chapter to see how Fitzgerald does that. Okay, so these are some of the things I'm going to talk to you about today. We'll come back to that in a minute. We're going to be thinking about how Fitzgerald uses a setting to prepare the reader for all the things that happen later in the chapter. How symbolism is used, and that's also symbolism of setting, and how Daisy and Tom come to mirror one another in this chapter. Although that final bullet point isn't particularly relevant to the recreative, I feel like it's something perhaps that you won't have touched on in the notes that I gave you, so I just wanted to go over that with you. So once again, my copy of the text is different from yours, so unfortunately you're going to have to keep pausing and finding the bits that I'm talking about, but I'll go slowly. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at then is the setting and how it prepares the reader for all the tragedy that happens in this chapter, with the arguments with Daisy and Tom, and with Myrtle's death as well. Obviously it's a very, very long chapter. We're mainly going to be touching on the beginning part of the chapter for this lesson. So I'm going into the second page of the chapter in my book, and immediately here Fitzgerald is preparing the reader for all of the tragedy that is about to ensue. So we've got the next day was broiling, almost the last, certainly the warmest of the summer. And this choice here for this adjective, the next day was broiling, this broiling word, basically means that it's like being grilled. You're that hot, it's like being grilled. And so it has an intensity to the day. So the setting and the heat, the pathetic fallacy, suggests that there's a real intensity for what's about to happen. And you'll see that as well when we go through with the characters and how they're associated with that. And as Nick gets onto the train, the straw seats of the car that he gets off the train, the straw seats of the car hovered on the edge of combustion. It's that hot, it feels like it's going to explode. So we have semantic field that is to do with heat, but an explosive kind of heat. So this is like being grilled, and this is like about exploding. So hang on, my visualizer seems to be going out of focus. There we go, it's because I've moved it. And then we've got a description of lots of different people who are perspiring, and everyone saying it's hot, it's hot, it's hot. But then we get to the Buchanan's house, and through the hall of the Buchanan's house blew a faint wind. Now, interestingly, it's absolutely boiling, and everyone moans about how boiling it is everywhere. But in the Gatsby's house, okay, it's only a faint wind, but it blew a faint wind. So there's sort of an element of difference at the Buchanans. Maybe that's something to do with, I mean, it's up to you how you interpret it. It might be to do with the wealth that they're experiencing. It might be to do with how sort of cool their relationship is, how it isn't particularly a warm environment. So there's always going to be an element of cool there. That's up to us to interpret, and that's interesting use of symbolism by Fitzgerald, and perhaps something that you might want to also include in your own writing. So thinking about pathetic fallacy and the temperature, and lots of description like that is very, very helpful. Okay. Is there any more? Did I notice any more to do with that? Oh yes. Interestingly then, so that, where am I up to now? So that's first page of chapter 7 for me. Second page, third page, 4, 5, and then I've also got a bit of pink here with Tom. Now I think it's really interesting that this sort of weather symbolism continues a little bit when describing Tom. So Daisy, at this point in the story, Daisy has just been sort of flirting with Gatsby, and has been very admiring, and Tom notices it, and it's sort of the first time that Tom really has noticed, and so where it says where has it gone? She says it twice, you resemble the advertisement of a man. I'm sure she says it before this as well. Oh yes, she says it twice here, sorry, I'm getting confused, it's because I didn't underline it. She says, you resemble the advertisement of the man. She says that to Gatsby. She went on innocently. You know, the advertisement of the man. So that's basically suggesting that he's perfect, because advertising is about perfection and the American dream, and obviously that will tap into something of Tom being quite jealous and envious. All right, Tom broke in quickly. I'm perfectly willing to go into town. Come on. So he changes the subject immediately. Come on, we're going into town. So how does this link to setting? So it says then he got up, his eyes still flashing between Gatsby and his wife. Come on, his temper cracked a little. The semantics here I thought were quite interesting when I was reading it. So the verbs used to describe Tom's eyes and his temper are similar to the language that we might use if there's a storm. So the semantics of flashing and cracked like a thunderstorm. So the weather symbolism has then continued to describing the character. Okay, it's quite subtle, but I think that's really interesting use of semantics in order to show that something is brewing and there's going to be some explosion about to happen. So we've had cracked, flashing, combustion, broiling, and the cool faint breeze at the Buchanan's house as well. So as you can see, Fitzgerald uses pathetic fallacy a lot in order to create an atmosphere and a feeling about the place, and this heat continues throughout the chapter. You probably noticed it was going on and on and on about how hot it is. I don't think I've highlighted any more really that are particularly important at the moment. We'll come to when they move into town in a second. A couple more things from the beginning of the chapter while I'm here. I hope you're not just flicking pages as quickly as I am. Sorry, I realise I'm just trying to find the bits that I want to tell you about. So page 1, so that's page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4. When I was talking about other symbolism, so not just the symbolism of pathetic fallacy, but other symbolism to do with setting, we have this line. You probably picked up on it yourself. When Gatsby arrives at the house, Gatsby stood in the centre of the crimson carpet and gazed around with fascinated eyes. That really stood out to me, and it's very ominous, and prepares the reader for deathly images of what's about to happen, how associated it's going to be with Myrtle's death. Also, the crimson sort of the fact that everything else is white, it really stands out. And then there's more description of the white of Daisy as well somewhere else within this section. I can't find it just now. So that really stands out, and also is ominous imagery and foreshadows the death of Myrtle. But also the crimson could be seen as that's their territory, and this is a dangerous territory to be in. Okay. He stood in the centre of it. He's breaking it. He's breaking the romance of it. So there's lots of interpretations of that one image that you could use. So Fitzgerald is being super clever there. A bit further down, we've got some more symbolism of Tom. He flung the door open, blocked out its space for a moment with his thick body, and hurried into the room. So every time Tom enters the space, he is overpowering it and blocking out, again, very ominous language, ruining something, changing something, taking something away. While I'm here, I mentioned that I would talk to you a little bit about how Daisy and Tom mirror one another in this chapter. It is the chapter where we really see that actually, you know what, they're very similar to one another. They deserve to be with each other. They probably are very well suited to each other. And it's not until the end of this chapter we realise that. But throughout this chapter you'll notice their language mirroring one another as we go through a bit more detail, and we see that again with the imperatives here. So Daisy also speaking in imperatives like Tom normally would. Make us a cold drink, cried Daisy. Okay, the manner verb is still cried Daisy. Everything is over the top with her, but still, make us a cold drink. We've got the imperatives, her mirroring Tom's language. We also question Daisy's motives. I am going a bit off topic here, but I've just written this down, so I'll share it with you. As he left the room, so Tom goes out of the room. As he left the room again, she got up and went over to Gatsby and pulled his face down, kissing him on the mouth. Now, they've got people there. Jordan's there, Nick's there, and say what you like about Tom, but that is really, really disrespectful. He goes out the room and she immediately kisses him. So it's almost, can't help but think that this is for show, and perhaps I've written here immediate trying to get caught. Perhaps is this really about revenge as opposed to true love and fascination? So and I think the reason I think that is because of the structure of this writing and how immediate it is after he goes out of the room. Perhaps it's because she was hurt because of the things he was doing on the phone, etc. earlier in the text. So okay, so what else did I want to tell you before we look at the extract for the recreative in a bit more detail? Okay, we've got the verbs used to describe the way Daisy's speaking is demanding, again, like Tom. I've spoken to you a little bit about you resemble, the children and Simon are baking cakes downstairs, and the kitchen is directly below me and they're making a right racket. I'm sorry if you can hear what's going on. I don't know what on earth they're making me. You resemble the advertisement of man. We've talked about that. That's a very provocative thing for her to say. It's goading, isn't it? Oh, I see it like that anyway. I don't like Daisy in this bit. I don't like any of them actually. So we've got Tom breaking in quickly. I've talked to you about the semantics of linking to the storm. I'll leave that bit alone because it's not particularly relevant to what you're about to do, and I can tell you later. So I'm going to skip this bit now, and as they go off in the car, and it's interesting because they change settings. So what happens in this chapter is they go from Tom and Daisy's house, so that's their territory. They're in charge. They do a lot of the talking. There's lots of imperative language, lots of symbolism to do with rage, and lots of the pathetic fallacy of the heat, and all of those kind of things. And then they decide to go into town. Now, by Fitzgerald doing that and taking them into town to this hotel lounge or wherever it is they go, they're moving to a place where it's nobody's territory. This is quite clever because really what it allows Fitzgerald to do is to explore the argument they're about to have in a place where everything can come out, because it doesn't belong to anybody. Nobody has got the upper hand in terms of where they are. So this setting is quite interesting. So they're going to this room in this hotel. They're going to this room. The room was large and stifling. That's an oxymoron, isn't it, in many ways? Well, I'm juxtaposing the two ideas. So it's a large room, but it's stifling. It's stifling hot, perhaps. They can't breathe in there. The atmosphere is stifling. Though it was already 4 o'clock, opening the windows admitted only a gust of hot shrubbery from the park. Daisy went to the mirror and stood with her back to us, fixed in her hair. The way the characters react in a new setting is interesting, because what we see is something about what you do immediately in a new setting really reveals a lot about the character. So Daisy immediately goes to the mirror and stood with her back to us, fixing her hair. So everything about her is about creating a facade. Okay, so the symbolism here for Daisy is about creating this image of herself. But Tom, he gets cross because everyone's like, oh, let's open another window, commanded Daisy again. We've got her giving orders again. There aren't any more. And then it's Tom's reaction is, the thing to do is to forget about the heat, said Tom impatiently. You make it 10 times worse by crabbing about it. And that's Tom all the time. That's symbolic of Tom. His actions within this setting are symbolic of him. Let's just hide everything under a carpet. Let's not worry about it. Let's not talk about it. Let's just get on with it. And so his reaction to the heat in this room, that's how we see his character. And again, the adverb impatiently. And then we have this amazing line from Gatsby. Why not let her alone, old sport, remarked Gatsby. You're the one that wanted to come to town. So we see Gatsby for the first time interject and stand up for Daisy, and of course then the setting, the description and the setting is really important. And I really want you to notice that we've got immediately after somebody has said something so provocative like that and so intense, there was a moment of silence. And you'll notice there's a short sentence there that really builds this tension. The telephone book slipped from its nail and splashed to the floor, whereupon Jordan whispered, "Excuse me," but this time no one laughed. So we've got different reactions to things. I sense that Jordan's feeling a little bit awkward, and there's lots of this short sentence and an odd thing, just a telephone book slipping from its nail, falling to the floor, Jordan whispering, and then tension is relieved by lots of quick conversation. Okay, and this is when the argument begins and Tom starts to question the old sport. In this setting, so I told you that they go to where the things that they go to reflect something about each of the characters. So Tom was saying to ignore the heat, and now he goes straight to the receiver. He picks up the receiver, the telephone receiver, and the compressed heat exploded into the sound, and we were listening to the pretentious chords of Mendelssohn's Wedding March from the ballroom below. Okay, so down below there's this they couldn't be more ironic. So purposefully Fitzgerald has created underneath them in the ballroom of the hotel there's a wedding happening. Okay, and they react very differently to that. Jordan is just appalled that someone's getting married in such a hot weather. It must be awful, she describes. But Daisy, interestingly, thinks about it in a kind of pleasant way. And again, the semantics are interesting, how she describes the wedding. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent again. Still, I was married in the middle of June. Now, Tom's there, and she said, I was married in the middle of June. As if it was just her. It was just about her. It was not to do with, you know, you would say we were married. You'd use the pronoun we as opposed to I. So again, not seeing herself very much part of a team here. This is all about the facade of the marriage. And then they have to go into this big, long, protracted conversation about some guy who fainted there. And then within that, we've got the setting of the music had died down as the ceremony began, and now a long cheer floated up through the window. So we've got again the irony of this romantic setting happening underneath them, sorry, the music has died down, and the ceremony has now got a long cheer floated in at the window. So there's this happiness underneath them that's going on beneath. While this sort of tense atmosphere is happening in the setting. So we've got the juxtaposition. So Fitzgerald's super clever in that he has juxtaposed happy images against the tense images. Okay. Sorry, I know I wrote some notes down somewhere. I can't see where I put them. Never mind. So again, the conversation continues, and we've got a waiter coming in. These are some of the things that you could do. I'm just putting that in focus again. A waiter knocked and came in with crushed mint and ice, but the silence was unbroken by his thank you and the soft closing of the door. This tremendous detail was to be cleared up at last. This is when we're going to find out about whether Gatsby is an Oxford man or not. Now, normally, often there's an interruption to either relieve tension. Here it adds to it, because even though this waiter's come in, this tremendous detail was to be cleared up at last. The final sentence of this paragraph is still about the Oxford man bit. So this basically just adds to it, adds to the tension rather than relieving tension, which is an interesting way of using an extra character to come into your scene. And this is where the extract begins that you've been asked to read for the recreative. So we've looked a little bit about how pathetic fallacy in particular can have an impact on the tension within the scene and how it feels. We've looked a little bit about the scenery, so we can have a contrast, a juxtaposition to outside of the scene. You can hear things going on elsewhere. And we've understood that this is nobody's territory where they are at the moment. So therefore, the argument is bound to be, I suppose, in some ways, honest. And in that sense, in this argument that you see both Tom and Gatsby having the power at different stages within the argument. Whereas I think if it was more in one setting, the argument might be slightly different. So if for example the argument was at Gatsby's mansion, which is what you're going to rewrite the scene as, you might be thinking about whether you want to portray that as Gatsby therefore holding more power, and therefore the opulence of Gatsby's wealth might lure Daisy in a bit more, and she might be more inclined to be with Gatsby. Or you might see it as actually, because the argument's at Gatsby's house, Tom might therefore be more envious or more aggressive. So it's up to you how you play it, but there should be a slight change in the way that the setting affects the argument and whose territory it's in, and that's up to you to decide. You can be as creative as you like. Also, I should say, I'm about to show the argument now. You don't have to stick to the same, it wouldn't be the same dialogue. The dialogue would change because the argument's in a different place, a different day. They're arguing about the same thing, but there are, Gatsby is going to tell Tom that Daisy and him are together or have been together, but everything else around that you can completely change. Okay, and although this is the bit that you've been asked to read, this yellow bit here down to, so it's that from what kind of a row are you trying to cause in my house anyway, they're not literally at their house. He means with my friends, in my place, with my money, in my territory. That's how he feels. down to here, Gatsby walked over and stood beside her, meaning Daisy. You can, if you want to, look elsewhere if you want to for things that you want to talk about. So if you want to reference the heat, you can do, I don't mind. So I won't read it all to you now, but this is the bit where Gatsby says, "I've got something to tell you, old sport." Sorry, move that. "I've got something to tell you, old sport," began Gatsby. But Daisy guessed at his intention. "Please don't," she interrupted helplessly. "Please, let's all go home." "Why don't we all go home?" So Daisy just wants to get away from it. She doesn't want to confront this situation. You might want to show that within your creative writing, or you might want to show a different side. It's up to you. So read this section and then decide how you think Gatsby, Daisy and Tom might react differently if they were at Gatsby's house. To do this piece of recreative though, you'll have to remember what Gatsby's house is like. So you'll need to look back at different chapters to remember. If you haven't got any revision notes on what Gatsby's house is like, you need to look back at that. So maybe you've already got some on your Gatsby sheet. I think if you go back to this chapter 3, I think it is. Yeah. In chapter 3, there's lots of nice descriptions of Gatsby's party and Gatsby's house. And the library room. Where's the library? Yeah. On a chance we tried an important looking door and walked into a high Gothic library panelled with carved English oak and probably transported completely from some ruins overseas. So you could use any setting from Gatsby's house. You could use the garden, you could use the library, or anywhere else where you have seen, or anywhere you imagine even, okay? But just be careful, make sure that it's in keeping with the way that the house would look. Okay, so if any of you have any further questions, just get in touch with me. Really, you're just recreating an argument between them where Gatsby reveals that Daisy Daisy and him have been together. You may choose them to react in exactly the same way, but I want the setting to reflect the mood in some way. So that's either through pathetic fallacy. It could be through the way that the characters interact within the setting. So what kind of things might they touch? How might Gatsby react if they touch certain things? Remember, those books are all bound. They've never, in the olden days, they used to all the books used to be sewn together here when they sold them, and then I forgot what the process is called. It does say so in this book somewhere. And then when you read the book, you would tear them off because you would have to tear each page, so it undid at the top. And in Gatsby's library, all of the books are still sealed, so that suggests that he's got all the books, but he's never actually read any of them. So he's all about how things appear rather than his actual enjoyment of reading or his knowledge of what's inside the books. So that might crop up within the argument. That would be interesting, wouldn't it? Okay, so like I said, if you have any questions, just let me know. I'm really looking forward to seeing you all soon, actually in school, which would be really nice. And we will, we're well ahead of the game, like I keep saying to you, and we've got plenty of time in year 13, so I don't want any of you worrying about any of this. All of these different tasks are just a variety to get you to have a go at lots of different styles of writing. We've got plenty of time next year to practice lots of examination questions. The examination questions are exactly the same, but I'll probably save ones that I think could plausibly come up in your exams, and use them in year 13 as well. Okay, so I don't want anybody getting stressed about this or worried about it. It is just a piece of recreative writing, you having a go at something different. And really enjoy reading all your work. You're brilliant at creative writing. Okay, see you all soon. Bye.